Here, my hunger met substance and depth, wisdom and direction, grew roots and took form. My passions took flight while my soul got grounded. My purpose got narrow while my horizons expanded. Now, my future is clear, my focus sharper, my calling precise, and hope my anthem. This place has given me everything I need to step forward, bold and confident. I'm ready to launch.
Good morning, Prairie, and welcome to the Way Chapel. This morning, we're privileged to have the KARN network with us. Today on my left, we have Richard Evans, Van Williams, Kevin Dirksen, and Wayne Nelson. We're looking forward to what they're going to share with us. Let's just pray together, and then we'll launch. Father, thank you so much for the privilege that we have to gather as a family. And we pray today that as the KARN network presents, God, that you would move in our hearts and our lives, help us to listen well, to take things to heart, and Lord, that you would do that work by your Spirit to transform us into the image of Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, good morning. It is just really awesome to be here with you folks this morning. And as Kelly mentioned, my name is Wayne. I'm not only part of KARN, but I am also a pastor at Mount Olive Church here in Three Hills. I have two roles. One is that of worship pastor, which I think most of us understand probably what one of those does. But I also wear another hat, and I am a recovery pastor as well. So I oversee addiction and recovery ministries. And you're probably wondering, how do you get that kind of a job? I don't think I've ever found that as a program that's offered at a Bible college or a seminary. Like you, I attended Prairie College a very long time ago. I also went to Prairie High School here. My folks were on staff. I married Lydia, who probably most of you know, went on to spend pretty much my entire adult life involved in church and church ministries. But 7 years ago, in fact, last Friday, I was just thinking, I actually led worship at the Global Connections Conference 7 years ago. And a couple of days after that, I went to a rehab center in Kelowna. Not giving my testimony, not leading a program, but I went as a client. You see, I'd spent a lot of years, I guess, living a lie, meanwhile hiding addictions in my life, and one of those was an alcohol addiction. And so that's why I was in treatment. I spent 30 days there and worked through a whole bunch of stuff in my life, and I learned some pretty awesome things and ways to deal with the wounds and the issues that were going on in my life. Prior to this, I had sat through hundreds of messages in church, in Bible school here at Prairie, looking around at this well put together group of people, wondering why was I the only one that was struggling. Now, as a pastor, and especially as a addiction recovery pastor, I've realized that I am not alone. And over these last couple of years, I've had the privilege of coming alongside dozens of particularly men and working through areas in their life where they finally recognized they needed help. You heard the messages last week at GCC. They were amazing messages on how we are called to go, how we are called to baptize, and how we are to teach. That message was from God's word to you and to I. So as I look at addiction and recovery ministry, I really don't see it as anything necessarily special. It's something that as the church, we are going to find both within the church and outside the church as well. And to me, it's discipleship. That's what it is. It's messy at times. It can be terribly inconvenient. It doesn't always fit into a nice little program. And it's going to probably break into our schedule from time to time as well. So The challenge that we face, though, especially in this time right now, which we're all very, very aware of, is that there's a saying that I've heard many, many times: the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's community. So how do we now, in this mess that we're in, how do we come alongside people that are struggling in addictions or in harmful behaviors? That's part of what we want to challenge you with here this morning, because I think it's up to us. It's up to you. We are in a generation where technology is available, obviously, to all of us in some pretty awesome ways. Obviously some terrible ways, but I think there's ways for us, for you as students, for us as the church, to be able to connect a little bit better. I had the privilege of going through a number of programs while I was in rehab. As a pastor now, I have the privilege of leading people in programs like the Conquer series, Freedom Session, the Genesis process. I was not aware of any of these, and unfortunately today, most of the church isn't either. In fact, they say that probably less than half of the church is even aware that addiction is an issue, and less than 7% of North American churches are actually doing anything about it. You guys, it's up to us. It's up to us as believers. It's up to us as the church. It's up to us who are called to go, to baptize, to teach, to be the ones that come alongside people today within the church. So we're going to share a little bit more about that with you here this morning.
Morning, I'm Van. I just wanted to talk to those of you who are saying, yeah, I'd like to help. I know there are some people who their life seems to be unmanageable, and they've kind of come to that place of knowing they have an addiction, but I don't know how to help people with addiction. I'm just don't have the information. There's a lot of ways to come alongside people who are struggling with addiction, and I know Michael Bookless talked a little while back about the fact that everybody here is likely struggling at some level. But for those of you who are saying, well, I feel like I'm in a place where I could help, but I just don't know what to do. Do you know anything about health? Do you know anything about nutrition? Do you work out regularly? That's one of the areas that people who are addicted often, their fitness life is kind of falling off the edge. And they need someone who can come alongside and say, you know what, let's work out 3 times a week. Just one of those areas where they're doing something good for their body, and you're maybe saying, these are the things that would be healthy for you to eat, and coming alongside in that way. Maybe you know about interviews, resumes, that kind of stuff. If they haven't been doing well financially, if they've sort of lost a job and they're sort of getting their act back together, for you to come alongside and if you know about finances, to be able to say, here's some really healthy ways that you can deal with your money. Maybe they might need to figure out a way to sign over their bank card or whatever for a season, those kinds of things. But when they get to the point where they need a job, do you know how to help a person go through that process? Maybe you just know how to give unconditional love and friendship. You know how to sit across from somebody and drink a coffee and ask them how they're doing, and listen to them and empathize with the stuff that they're going through, and try and be there for them in that way. Here's a question for you. Think about this. Can you hold a bucket? One of the things that's most needed in these situations, I know it's kind of intimidating for some people to come into a situation with a person who is addicted and maybe is and their life is kind of coming unglued, for you to come in there. But what I mean by hold a bucket is if someone is throwing up, you're there with them, you're present, and presence is what is necessary. And for you to come alongside and say, what can be done in this situation? It doesn't matter if you know about addiction, you know how to clean up a house and help come alongside somebody and be there for them. You know how to call 911. Presence is what is really necessary for a lot of this. Can you drive? Are you willing to sit in a heartbreaking situation? Because if you are willing to go through that for Christ and for this person, then you can drive them to detox, and you can sit with them while they wait, whatever, really early in the morning to find out if they're even going to get in. And you can sit there and watch the people who get in and the people who don't get in, and you can be there. Again, it's presence, but it's they can't. A lot of them can't drive themselves and won't get themselves up early in the morning to get there, but you can do this. Do you know how to use the Google? I mean, do you know how to research on the internet? I mean, it's not the Google. What is it? Anyway, so it's not that complicated for you to figure out what resources are around you. You know how to do this. You can say, hey, there's a recovery place, there's a rehab center, there's whatever in this area. You can find those things, and then you can talk to people and see what they've said about them. You can find out the reviews about those places. So you can do this. You can come alongside and find out what is available. Wayne mentioned a number of programs, and you'll be able to rewind this video and write those down. Can you disciple somebody coming alongside them? Do you understand transparency? Do you understand vulnerability? Do you understand accountability? Much of the church doesn't, but if you do, you're a person who can really disciple in the way the way everybody needs to be discipled. But someone who's an addict is going to need that, especially the understanding of accountability. So you have that ability, then you can do this. But maybe you have gone through Freedom Session. Maybe you have gone through Genesis Process or Conquer Series or one of these things. Now you have the ability to come alongside somebody else and say, hey, you know what, I'll go with you to this. Or you'll join as a facilitator, or with the Genesis Process, you get the books and you read it with them. You can do this. So there's lots of opportunities and ways in which you can do this. So I just want to encourage you. All of these things help as you come alongside, because the authentic connection between you and that person is what they need. The addict needs the connection with people. And so if they have 3 or 4 people connecting with them in different ways, they are getting what they need, and you are helping. So that's just our encouragement to you today, is that you actually are already equipped to start. This is Kevin.
Cool. So we want to share a couple stories of coming out of addiction, just to show the reality and to show that there is hope in all of this. So take a moment to picture this in your mind. It's a beautiful, warm night in the tropical highlands of Papua New Guinea. I'd been hanging out with a friend and was just heading home for the evening. And as I walk back through our front door of the house, I'm greeted by my wife, who is crying, who is obviously very upset, because that night she had discovered my porn addiction. We had talked about my struggle with porn before, but it had always been swept under the carpet and never really dealt with. So it was probably a mix of the stress of living in another culture, the realization that this was a regular activity in my life, and all of that mixed together that pushed my wife and I to actually start dealing with my addiction. She was crushed, of course, and my sin only fed her depression, her anxiety, her low self-esteem. And this revelation for her meant that now we needed to have conversations with the HR department, both in Papua New Guinea and back at Wycliffe Bible Translators headquarters in Calgary. Friends whom I had worked with for years before that now knew that I had an addiction. And then we needed to have conversations with our friends and supporters. Being caught in a porn addiction as a missionary is an incredibly humiliating experience. So we chose to return home to Canada after 10 months into our 2-year term overseas. We didn't tell everyone all the details about why we were coming back, but it was obvious that we were coming back early. People knew how long we were going to be gone. We did say that we were coming back to address marriage problems. So people knew that things were not all right. Fortunately, I was able to step back into my old job as a recruiter with Wycliffe, but it was under the conditions that Melissa and I be part of some sort of program to begin healing our marriage. Throughout all this, I began to see the damage I had done. I fed my wife's personal struggles, as I had already said. I showed her that she was not valuable to me. And I had begun to create that same foundation in my girls, in my 3 daughters, whether they realized it or not. And ultimately, I added one more check mark to the scorecard of people in ministry falling into moral failure. As embarrassing as our return to Canada was, we were greeted by our friends and family with open arms. They knew we were hurting. They did not know all the details, at least most of them didn't, but they withheld judgment and just welcomed us back. My coworkers at the Wycliffe office welcomed us. Our supporters did not cut us off. And our supporting churches, when we shared that we were dealing with some marriage problems, were actually encouraged to hear that not everything always goes smoothly on the mission field. They were glad to hear something other than the everything about ministry is wonderful narrative. So over the next couple of years, as I began to talk more about my addiction and be more willing to share that, that really helped with my recovery, and I think was a very key component of it. It wasn't that I was merely opening up with other people, but that by opening up, I was developing relationships. Relationships where I could be challenged, where I could be rebuked, where I could be encouraged, where friends could call me out on negative behavior and thoughts, and where they could affirm good decisions that were being made. It took time, probably a couple years before trust really started, I think, being rebuilt between Melissa and I, but that trust that has begun to be rebuilt and regrown between Melissa and I would say is far better than the naive trust we had when we first got married. And in the last couple of years, I have been able to start helping others as well, sharing my journey and my insights in my recovery so that other guys can find freedom from their own addictions. So what had once separated me from an intimate relationship with Jesus now became an experience I could use to help others in fighting for their own sexual purity and for intimacy with God. So it took me till I was about 33 years old to really kick the habit. But what is really encouraging now is seeing guys and girls who are a decade younger than I was begin their journey to freedom. So this is my challenge and my encouragement. If you are caught up in an addiction or in engaging in activities that could lead into addiction, whatever they are, alcohol, drugs, porn, video games, too much time on your cell phone, whatever it is, deal with it now. There are a lot of people in this college, at Prairie here, in Three Hills, and for many of you now being back at home, there are probably people in your churches as well who are willing and glad to step into this battle with you and to help you fight it. And God has equipped you with everything you need to fight this battle. And He will lead you to victory if you are willing to fight this battle His way.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Richard, as Kelly mentioned. Like Wayne, I grew up in Three Hills. I went to Prairie till grade 5 and then switched over to the town school and then came back for the EMT program. This might date me. It was the very first year they ran it. I was the guinea pig year. Yeah. So I grew up knowing all the right things, knowing all the wrong things and not doing them. And my journey kind of started right when I was around 12. I got into pornography, and for me, it was the innocuous things that people think about, the Sears magazine, right? It's amazing what can be delivered to your own home, and you don't even realize it. But that continued on. That became an addiction and continued on for years and years. After I got into the EMT program, however, I started working and just didn't really have the relationship with God that I needed to have, and with people actually either. So I was adamantly opposed to alcohol all growing up, and then was out with some firefighter buddies and decided, hey, it can't be that bad. You know, they're all having a good time. So I had a beer, and my goodness, I felt like I was 10 feet tall. So I kept drinking and drinking and drinking. And over the next many years, I drank until I was passed out usually. And there was a lot of times when at work, things happened. I couldn't quite justify what was going on around me. And I mean, there's proven links between trauma and addiction. And that's kind of something that happened with me. I got into trauma situations and I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't believe that God could deal with it either. So I just drank it away. And it came to a point where I had pushed everyone else around me out because they had a problem with me drinking. And when I wasn't working, which was a lot of the time, I was drunk and I was not really present in my family's life at all. I had no community. I was isolated from everything. I lost a lot of friends. And I just didn't care as long as I had that next vodka bottle. And my life became consumed with knowing where I had stashed it, which sometimes wasn't easy to find because I'm a pretty good hider when I'm drunk, apparently. So I hated myself, hated who I was, and I just couldn't live with the intense guilt and shame that was in my life. And the thing with emotional pain, like guilt, shame, not feeling good enough, is that it screams out, it cries out. And it's not like a physical pain. Like you break your leg, you can probably stuff it down until you get to the hospital and get some pain meds. It's not a big deal. The guilt and the shame eats you away from the inside, and you cannot do anything about it. So you find ways of coping, you find ways of medicating it, like pornography, like alcohol, drugs, whatever. I mean, that's just the big three, right? There's obviously other ways of doing that too. But I finally couldn't handle that pain anymore, and I decided that I was done with life. In 2015, I tried committing suicide a few times. And they were very, very dark times because I had nobody around me. I'd pushed them all away. And I was believing the lie that Satan tells you that you're all alone in this. Nobody cares. Nobody will understand. So I gave into it. And as a result, I spent 2015 Christmas in the Centennial Hospital. That was a pretty dark time. But as a result of that, I was able to start dealing with some of the traumas from work and some of the stuff in my life that I wasn't able to justify. For a time, it got better. And then, because I hadn't turned to God yet, it didn't go anywhere past that. I still hated myself a lot of the time. And the only way to medicate emotional pain that I knew of was alcohol. So I turned back to it and drank and drank and drank, and it got worse, significantly worse. Now there were a lot of times during that period when I had people that cared, even though I didn't believe they cared, because who could care about me? I was just a drunk. There was one guy from our church that came over. His wife is friends with my wife. And when I was passed out or drunk and not making much sense to my wife, she would call him. He would come over and he would just be there. I'm sure he gave me a lot of other talks and ultimatums and whatnot, but the thing I remember is that he was there. And even when I didn't want him to be, he was there. I remember one time hearing about it after that I was passed out on the bathroom floor, and my wife called him, and she was losing her mind because she couldn't wake me up. And he came over, and he was just there the whole time while I was out until I woke up. He was there. And that means a lot to me now. And it did mean a lot to me back then, too. I just didn't want to admit it. My cousin took me out for lunch. And this was probably a month before I went to rehab. And he said to me, I remember one statement. He said, "Sounds like you're not quite ready to give it up," as I'm trying to give him all the excuses of why I'm not wanting to go to rehab. And that was a significant moment in my life, because that opened the door to the fact that maybe I wasn't ready, and even just thinking about it like that was huge. So there's ways that you guys can come alongside people. I finally hit rock bottom June 24, and I went to the same rehab center that Wayne went to. I think it was because of you. I don't remember. But those are pretty blurry times. But I went there for 3 months. And I was so thankful for that. We went through the Genesis process as part of that rehab. And then about a month in, I finally realized that I can't do this alone. And I don't have the strength. And I turned my life over to God. And that's a scary thing to do, because up until that point, I was in control of me. And all of a sudden, I'm not in control of me anymore. And yeah, life has been a roller coaster since then. A good roller coaster. But it impressed upon me the importance of community. As I'm, getting out into the real world again. This is now 2.5 years since I went, almost 3. And since, I think it was about 2.5 years ago, we started meeting as a small group Saturday morning, just a few of us guys, and truthfully and honestly telling each other what's going on in our lives. If nothing else, be a part of something like that. Be intentional about being in guys' lives or girls. I mean, I'm not going to pigeonhole people here, but be in people's lives. Provide that community support, because I really think that if I had that community support, someone in my face, wondering how my life is going, and then truly sharing honestly how their life is going, I would probably have realized that people aren't perfect around me, and then I didn't need to be, because I knew I wasn't. Yeah. there are programs like Van said, there's all sorts of, I mean, the ones that have helped me, I'll just share them real quick here. Genesis Freedom Session, Celebrate Recovery is around starting this fall, I believe. Safe Home Sunday and Covenant Eyes. These are just small ways in which you can be a part of people's lives. Even if you don't have an addiction necessarily yourself, say, you can still be a part of these programs and help other people, come alongside them. And, you know, don't be like Dave. Dave is an ostrich. He sticks his head in the sand. Don't be Dave. That's about it for me. Is there anything else you want me to add?
I don't know that there is time for questions, but if there was a question already posted, so there's no time for that. But just wanted to let you know that we're trying to present or offer Genesis process. Of course, with current situation in the world, that may not be happening, at least the way we were intending. But it may happen another way, electronically, whatever. And so many more of you might be able to take it now and this time than before. We don't know that for sure, but just know that these things that we've mentioned, we are trying to make sure that they're available to people and look them up and find them. But thank you for joining us today.